So I've got my coffee ready, I've got my laptop ready, and the sun is shining bright right now, so I thought it'd be a good chance to film another YouTube video for you guys. And today I'm going to be talking about consulting interviews. Now, if you've already started looking into the industry and thinking how to break through into consulting, then you probably already know that the industry requires you to do two types of interviews: the case study interview and just a normal fit interview. And in this video, I will be focusing on the case study interview only, and I will make videos about fit interviews later in the future, but let's focus on case studies in this video. Now, the first thing you're probably asking is, what is a case interview? How is it different from other interviews? What does it actually mean to have a case study interview? Basically, a case interview is where you are given an actual project and then you're asked to solve this project. This is just a very high-level explanation of what it is. The project can be something very specific, it could be something very broad, but usually you're given this problem or prompt. You have to take various different approaches to try to solve this problem, and at the end you then have a recommendation that you will give your interviewer as how to solve this problem. If that doesn't make sense, then it's okay. I promise it will make a lot more sense by the end of the video. The reason why most consulting companies, especially strategic consulting companies, use case studies to test the applicants is because they're a really good proxy to test whether the candidate has really good critical thinking skills, whether they have good logical reasoning, and also they test really good commercial awareness and whether or not you understand the operation of a business. Case studies are also really great at testing how you deal with ambiguity and just limited amount of information, because that usually is what happens in a consulting role. So in a case study interview, they will give you limited information to see how you deal with the problem. So overall, these case studies are really good at testing whether or not a candidate has good business acumen, good commercial awareness, good logical thinking, good logical reasoning, critical analytical skills, and also overall creative skills and creativity and ability to think outside the box. So now that you kind of understand why case studies are a thing in general, let's go into more specifics. Case study interviews usually are split between two main categories, and it's interviewer-led and interviewee-led. Interviewer-led means that the interviewer who's giving you the case study is, as the name explains, leading the interview, and they will give you prompts and questions and specific problems that they want you to solve. This might look like a math question that they'll give you, or they'll ask you, hey, can you list down all the potential opportunities that you see in this market? Can you list down the specific risks? They will give you the questions and then you will have to provide those answers. This is very, very different from an interviewee-led interview. So an interviewee-led interview, you actually have to take the interviewer through your logical reasoning. This means that you have to basically try to guess what questions lead to the right answer, because they will not give you the questions. You have to ask and you have to lead them down the right path. So for example, let's just come up with a random business prompt like McDonald's wants to take over Dunkin' Donuts in the next couple of years. Is this a profitable acquisition or not? So that is your business problem. Then, as the interviewee, I have this sentence and this phrase that I had to run with. And basically, what I do is I start thinking of all the different things that I need to solve this problem, all the different pieces of information that I need to put together. So I can categorize this by, I first need to know what the market looks like. Is the donut business looking good right now? Is the coffee business looking good right now? What is the growth or the size of the market? All these different things. So I, myself, as an interviewee, so the person who's getting interviewed, have to write this down all in a paper and then ask the interviewer these questions. Then they can give me information for me to solve the problem. So it's very, very different. Interviewee-led is actually, I think, more popular usually within case study interviews, specifically with larger strategy companies. So I know that BCG uses interviewee-led, Bain & Company uses interviewee-led. I think McKinsey uses interviewer-led. So it's just based on what company you're applying to. You'll have to figure out whether you have to practice interviewee-led or interviewer-led. But I promise you, it will be very helpful for you to practice both types of interviews, because of course there are a lot of synergies between the two, and they're basically both testing your commercial awareness and your logical reasoning and your analytical skills. So it's good to practice some of each. So now that we know about interviewee-led case studies and interviewer-led case studies, let's talk about the topics that usually show up in case study interviews. From my own personal experience interviewing with different consulting companies, and of course talking to my friends who've also interviewed, I would say there's probably 3 main popular categories within case study interviews and main topics that will most likely show up in your interview. The first one is market sizing. Market sizing is a very, very popular topic that is most likely gonna show up at one point during your interviews. And it's basically the situation where you are asked to size a market. Very self-explanatory, but if that doesn't make sense to you, basically the problem would be something like, we are looking into joining the customized hair care industry. I'm just saying this because I have a shampoo bottle in front of me. We are looking into entering the customized hair care industry. Can you size this market for us and tell us what the potential revenue is going into this market? And usually just saying, just tell me how much is this market making a year? What is the size of the market, right? And then you have to take that prompt and make a bunch of different assumptions and guesstimates to reach a final unit. And it can either be, again, interviewer-led or interviewee-led. Another topic that is very, very popular and also most likely going to show up at some point in your interviews or at some point in your case practices is profitability. In this particular case study, they will ask you to outweigh the potential revenue, the potential costs, and ask you whether it is profitable to do a certain business move. And usually in these type of cases, they're very analytical and it's mostly calculations. They will ask you to calculate the costs, ask you to calculate the revenue or the sales, and then just do a cost benefit analysis, and that is a profitability case. The third topic that I would say is quite predominant within case study interviews is mergers and acquisitions. In this case, usually it can be very qualitative or quantitative. It doesn't have to be specifically fully about financials. It can be very much about synergies and operational aspects of acquiring a company, but usually this topic will be all about M&A. So yes, I would say these 3 topics are the ones that tend to show up the most often. So market sizing, profitability, and M&As. But this doesn't mean that these are the only topics that show up in case studies. I once got a case study that was about an NGO, and it was all about just social impact and whether or not, outweighing the benefits of social impact, which has nothing to do with financials. You can also you can just get all sorts of case studies, and not only will you get these different types of business problems, the case studies that you will get will also differ in industries. This means that you do have to know your industries well. For example, in the retail consumer goods industry, just make sure that you understand how the supply chain works and how logistics works, how operation works, what marketing looks like in that industry, and then in something else completely different like real estate, what margins look like in the industry, what investments look like here. Just have an overall understanding of different industries, because of course when you're given a case study, you will, it will be based on a particular industry. You should definitely try to understand what different industries look like and just have a basic commercial awareness across the board. I also want to give you guys a little bit more context around what it's actually like to be in a case study interview. And in this scenario, you have to actually play a role. It's like a role-playing exercise almost, where you have to be the consultant. So if you're applying for, let's say, McKinsey, right? You have to pretend that you're a McKinsey consultant, and then your interviewer will pretend that they are the client company. So I, as a consultant, have to then propose a solution to the client company, because that's what happens in a typical consulting scenario. A client company will go to a consulting company and ask them to solve a problem. So in this mock interview exercise, that is what you have to do, and you have to play the role. Once you're in the actual case interview, this is usually the overall structure and the process of the interview, okay? It's usually around 45 minutes. Sometimes the short ones can be 30 minutes, but usually it's around 45 minutes, I would say on average. And it will start with a case prompt. It will give you a business prompt, as I've given in this video multiple times as an example, but they will give you a specific, one-liner about what you need to solve. After this, the next step is to start structuring. Structure your thinking into very specific frameworks. Make sure you have a horizontal paper, and this is what you'll do when you practice case studies all the time. But you'll get a paper, and then as soon as you get the prompt, you write it down and you start brainstorming and writing down different buckets of topics that you will need to tackle throughout your case study. Usually you will have your primary buckets, and these are the first ones that you start writing down as soon as you hear the prompt, and things that you know you will definitely have to talk about throughout your case. And it can look like, you know, a bucket on financials, a bucket on competitors, a bucket on the market, and then a bucket on risks or something like that, right? This is just an example. Then you have your secondary buckets. And basically these are just your first preliminary buckets, but just split out into more detailed topics. For example, if my first bucket is financials, I can then split this into costs and revenue. Within costs, I can split this within fixed costs and variable costs. Usually a lot of your points within a case study interview is attributed to your structure. So if you have a good structure, straight off the bat, you are in really good position. And if you have a bad structure, it's really hard to recover from that. And usually you will end up failing the interview. So case structure is super, super crucial in a case interview. After you have your structure, you will then start going into your analysis. So once you have all your structure done, right, you start going bucket by bucket, and if it's interviewer led, they will tell you what questions you need to do, and then that structure will guide your thinking. But if it's an interviewee led case study, this structure is going to be a lifesaver, because you can just go from bucket to bucket, close down each items, and just, if you think that perhaps, oh, like competitors, this is where all the answers are, my interviewer is giving me a lot of information, I'm gonna go down this branch a little bit further, and then you start building that out. So that's when you start your analysis, and usually within your analysis is where maths comes in. I know a lot of people don't like maths. I hate maths, trust me, so I can relate. But usually within your analysis, they will ask you to calculate something, and you'll have to just do that at the top of your head. The last part is the conclusion, which is super important. As just like the first part where the structure is important, the conclusion is so important to just wrap up the whole case well. Usually what I recommend is to give one recommendation at the end of your case. I recommend X company to do X, and then you give your reasoning as to why you recommend this, and then give the risks that are involved with this decision. And at the end, I always like to include some next steps to look into after this said so decision is made. Also, your conclusion has to be very succinct. It's important to have a very clear and cut conclusion. Do not make it like a babble, like narrative thing. It should never be that. You are basically trying to pretend like you are in a board meeting and you have all these C-suite level executives sitting here listening to you, wondering where they should put their money in, and the last thing they need is a whole story. Like, they want yes or no. They want what's the numbers, what's the profitability. So that is what you're going to be giving to them in your conclusion, nothing else. So that is an introduction of what consulting case studies are like, and what you can expect out of them, and how they're structured. And if you are someone who's just started to apply to consulting, I know that a lot of consulting companies they usually recruit around this time for internships, and it'd be the first time you've ever seen a case study. So it's good to kind of start thinking about how to start practicing and what they are. So hopefully this was a very useful video to guide you throughout that learning process. And let me know if there's anything else you'd like to know. I do know that there's a lot more to learn about case studies, and this video didn't cover it all, and there's just so much more to learn. But I'll make future videos about those topics. So if you guys want to see more of these, then click the like and subscribe button down below, please. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.